The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to RMC Learning Solutions monthly webinar series. This month is the power of stakeholder engagement. Engage stakeholders like a pro. Little bit about this webinar. Tricks of the Trade and PM Fast Track are both registered trademarks of Peterson's LLC, doing business as RMC Learning Solutions. PMI, PMP, CADM, PMI ACP, PMI PVA, and PMBOK are all registered trademarks of Project Management Institute. This webinar contains materials from both RMC Learning Solutions and PMI, and you can see the names of the books and materials listed here. And before we get started, I do need to say a word about copyright. This document contains proprietary materials copyrighted to RMC Learning Solutions. This document is not for use or disclosure outside of those who attend this webinar and may not be copied, recorded, or reproduced in any manner, in whole or in part, without the prior written consent of RMC Learning Solutions. We appreciate all of you adhering to this for us today. Little bit about me. My name is Cheryl Ide. I have over 20 years of experience in training and development, project management, and instructional design. And I have both an MA and an MBA. A little bit about RMC Learning Solutions itself for those of you that might not be familiar with us. We were founded in 1991 by Rita Mulcahy, and we were purchased by Peterson's LLC just last year in January of 2024. So far, we have helped over 1 million professionals prepare for certification exams. This includes project management, business analysis, and Agile. We offer numerous learning solutions and products ranging from self-study to e-learning to classroom to languages around the world. And we are an outcome-based learning through professional instructors, coaches, and mentors. Our agenda for the day, we'll be talking about how to create stakeholder maps that work. We'll be setting communication cadences that stick. And we'll learn how to manage tough conversations diplomatically and with confidence. Now let's talk about why stakeholder engagement matters so much. First, research and experience show that projects fail more often due to poor stakeholder engagement than because of technical issues. Think about that for a second. Even if the technology works, the project can still fail if the people impacted by it aren't involved or don't support it. A system no one uses or a process no one follows is essentially a failed project. That's why building relationships and trust with stakeholders is every bit as important as solving the technical challenges. Second, we have to consider the cost of change. Early engagement reduces rework and saves significant time and money. The cost of making changes grows dramatically the later you are in a project. If a stakeholder raises a requirement during the planning stage, it may take just a conversation and a small design adjustment to resolve. If they raise that same requirement after the product has already been built. It could mean tearing things down and starting over. So the earlier we bring stakeholders into the process, the more influence they have and the lower the cost of change. Finally, engaged stakeholders lead to a much higher success rate. When people feel heard and included, they are far more likely to support the outcomes. Engagement creates ownership and buy-in, which means stakeholders don't just point out problems, they help solve them. That increases confidence, reduces resistance, and improves adoption of the final deliverable. Here's a quick example for you. Imagine a software rollout where the IT department develops a new tool in isolation. At launch, end users reject it because it doesn't fit their workflow. Compare that to a rollout where users are engaged from the very beginning, providing feedback on prototypes and testing features along the way. The second project almost always succeeds because stakeholders helped shape the product to meet their needs. So the takeaway here is simple. Engaged stakeholders aren't just a nice to have. They're the key to project success. Now let's talk about the stakeholder engagement process. Stakeholder engagement isn't a one-time task. It's a continuous, iterative process throughout the life of a project. PMI organizes this process into 4 key steps. Number 1, identify stakeholders. This means going beyond the obvious names and looking broadly at anyone who can impact the project or be impacted by it. That includes sponsors, end users, subject matter experts, regulatory bodies, even community members in some cases. A common mistake is overlooking less obvious stakeholders. The later you discover them, the more costly their requirements or concerns become. Number 2, plan stakeholder engagement. Here, the project manager and team decide how to engage each stakeholder or stakeholder group. Will they be consulted weekly, given monthly updates, or deeply involved in the decision-making? Planning also involves analyzing power, influence, and interests. For example, a high-power, high-interest stakeholder needs regular interaction, while someone with low interest and low influence may only need occasional updates. Number 3, manage stakeholder engagement. This is where the plan comes alive. We're building relationships, facilitating communication, managing expectations, and making sure stakeholders are meaningfully involved. For example, in Agile environments, this might look like sprint reviews and demos where stakeholders give real-time feedback. In more predictive settings, it may mean status reviews and steering committee meetings. And finally, number 4 is monitor stakeholder engagement. This step asks, are our strategies working? Are stakeholders satisfied, or are we seeing disengagement, resistance, or miscommunication? If engagement levels don't match what we planned, we need to adjust tactics, whether that's changing communication styles, increasing meeting frequency, or resolving conflicts. The key takeaway here is that engagement is dynamic. Stakeholders' needs, interests, and influence shift over time. Our role as project leaders is to continuously assess and adjust so that stakeholders remain aligned and supportive of the project. Let me give you an example here. Let's talk about a new employee onboarding system. Your organization is rolling out a new digital onboarding system for new hires. The project goal is to replace paper-based forms with a streamlined online process. To identify stakeholders, the project manager starts with HR, IT, and the hiring managers. But as discussions progress, they also realize they need to involve payroll, compliance officers, and even a group of recent new hires who can share feedback on pain points. As they move into the next step for planning stakeholder engagement, high power, high interest stakeholders like the HR director and the CIO are both scheduled for weekly updates. Hiring managers are included in monthly reviews, while new hires are invited to test prototypes and provide feedback at key milestones. When we move into managed stakeholder engagement, the team hosts demos of early prototypes for HR staff and hiring managers, gathering feedback before making further adjustments. Regular updates are also shared with compliance officers to ensure that legal requirements are being met. And finally, in the monitor stakeholder engagement phase, midway through the project manager notices that hiring managers are missing review sessions. After checking in, they discover managers feel the meetings are too technical. The engagement plan is adjusted, sessions are simplified and tailored to focus on user experience rather than IT details. Engagement quickly improves with this group. Now, looking at this example, where do you think the biggest risk of failure lies if stakeholder management is missed? Which of these steps, identify, plan, manage, or monitor, do you see teams struggling with most in your own projects and organizations? Identifying stakeholders is the very first step in building a strong engagement plan. If we get this wrong, or if we miss key stakeholders early, the project will almost certainly face costly changes and delays later. So where do we start? One of the best sources is the business case and the project charter. These documents usually outline who requested the project, who benefits, and who provides oversight. They can point it directly to sponsors, customers, or impacted departments. We can also consult with subject matter experts, or SMEs, and other project managers who have run similar initiatives to uncover stakeholders we might not immediately think about. Beyond documents, there are some tools that we can use to dig deeper. Brainstorming sessions, interviews, and focus groups are especially valuable. Each of these helps us cast a wide net and gather names and perspectives that might otherwise be missed. For example, a focus group with end users can surface needs that aren't in the original requirements but will be critical for adoption. And here's the key point. Missed stakeholders are costly later. When a stakeholder shows up halfway through the project with new requirements, it often means expensive rework, delays, or even reputational damage if they feel excluded. That's why PMI emphasizes identifying as many stakeholders as possible early on, and then updating the stakeholder register continuously as new ones are discovered. The takeaway is this: stakeholder identification is not just a box to check at the start. It is a proactive, ongoing process to avoid surprises and keep the project aligned with real needs. Think about a project that you've been involved with. Was there ever a stakeholder who came in late and caused major changes? How could earlier identification have changed your outcome? Now let's talk about stakeholder mapping. Once we've identified our stakeholders, the next challenge is understanding how best to prioritize and engage with them. Stakeholder mapping gives us structured ways to analyze influence, interest, and urgency, and then tailor our engagement strategies. The first tool is the power interest grid shown here. For those of you with our PMP exam prep book, you can find this is figure 14.3 in our book. This is a simple 2x2 matrix that helps us group stakeholders based on their level of power over the project and their level of interest in it. High power and high interest stakeholders should be engaged closely and regularly. High power but low interest stakeholders need to be kept satisfied but not overwhelmed with detail. Low power but high interest stakeholders should be kept informed so they stay supportive. And those with both low power and low interest only need minimal monitoring. This grid is particularly helpful for quickly seeing where to focus your time and energy when it comes to communicating with your stakeholders. Second tool is the stakeholder cube. This is a three-dimensional version of the grid, but instead of just power and interest, it also incorporates additional attributes such as attitude or influence. For example, someone might have moderate power and high interest, but their negative attitude could make them a critical risk to the project. This cube helps us visualize multiple dimensions at once, and it's especially useful in complex projects with different stakeholder groups. Finally, we have the salience model. This model evaluates stakeholders on three attributes: power, legitimacy, and urgency. Stakeholders with all three are known as definitive stakeholders, and they are the highest priority. You see them right in this chart. Those with power and legitimacy, but not urgency, are called dominant stakeholders. So you can see that they're very centralized as well. Others may be demanding or dependent or even dangerous, depending on which attributes that they have. This model helps us understand not just who is influential, but who requires immediate attention based on the situation. The key takeaway is that stakeholder mapping is not a one-time task. As projects evolve, power shifts, interest changes, and urgency increases, reassessing your stakeholder map regularly ensures you're always engaging the right people at the right time. Now, if you think about a recent project, if you plotted one of your stakeholders on this power interest grid, where do you think that they would fall? Might your approach change if you used the salience model instead? Another powerful tool for stakeholder engagement, especially in adaptive or agile environments, is the use of personas. A person is essentially a concise, humanized view of a stakeholder or stakeholder group. Instead of just saying end users or customers, we create a short profile that captures their goals, challenges, values, and context. This makes stakeholders less abstract and much easier for the team to relate to. Why does this matter? Personas help anchor design decisions in real needs. When teams are making choices about features, functionality, or even workflows, they can ask, would this decision work for this persona? Does it solve their problem? That helps us keep the design choices practical and user-centered rather than based only on assumptions. Let's look at an example from the PMP materials, the Jamelia job seeker persona. Jamelia is a recent nursing graduate looking for a job. She doesn't own a computer, she works irregular hours, and she needs free access to technology at unusual times. By defining Jamelia's needs, like free internet access, easy instructions, job board availability, we can better understand how a public library, job portal, or HR system should be designed. The value of personas is that they bring stakeholders to life. They remind us that behind every requirement is a real person with specific challenges, goals, and expectations. And when the project team keeps that human perspective front and center, the results are almost always more successful and better received. Think about a project you're working on now. If you had to create a persona for one of your stakeholders, what would their profile look like? What specific additional columns to my stakeholder register and or my communications plan related to these models? I can add columns for influence and interest, power, and I can document the communication methods needed for each of those in my record so that when I sit down to send updates, it's easy for me to see what each stakeholder needs and how often they need it. Now for planning stakeholder engagement. Once stakeholders have been identified, the next step is to plan how we will engage them. This isn't a one-size-fits-all activity. It requires deliberate thought about the level of engagement, the quality of the relationship, and the cadence of communication. The first step is to define engagement levels. PMI uses a spectrum that runs from unaware, meaning the stakeholder doesn't even know the project exists, to resistant, neutral, supportive, and all the way up to leading. Our goal is to know where each stakeholder currently stands and where we need them to be. For example, if a key sponsor is neutral, we'll want to move them towards supportive or leading. Second, successful engagement relies on building trust. That comes from honesty, empathy, and respect. When stakeholders feel listened to and treated with sincerity, they are far more likely to provide the support and advocacy we need. Trust is the foundation of influence. Finally, we need to customize the cadence for each stakeholder. Some may need daily touch points or sprint reviews, while others only want monthly executive summaries. The key is matching the frequency and the format of your communications to their interest and their influence. Over-communicating can overwhelm, while under-communicating can leave stakeholders disengaged or even resistant. The big takeaway here is that engagement planning is about tailoring. Every stakeholder is unique, and the more we align our approach to their needs, the more effective the project will be. Think about one of your projects. Was there a stakeholder where you adjusted the communication cadence, either more frequent or less frequent, and it made a difference? What happened? Think about that and think about how you might use this in your current and future projects. Communication cadences that stick. One of the biggest drivers of stakeholder satisfaction is consistent, clear communication. But to make that stick, it has to be deliberate and tailored. First, we need to match the communication method to stakeholder preference. Some stakeholders want a quick text or email, while others prefer formal reports, dashboards, or face-to-face conversations. For example, an executive sponsor might want a concise one-page summary each month, while end users may prefer live demos or hands-on workshops. The right method ensures they stay engaged without feeling overwhelmed or disconnected. Second, leverage information radiators. These are highly visible, easily accessible displays of project information like Kanban boards, burn down charts, or digital dashboards. They allow stakeholders to see progress at a glance, reduce the need for constant status updates, and foster transparency. In Agile environments, information radiators are a best practice because they keep everyone on the same page, literally. Finally, we have to support remote stakeholders with digital tools. In today's distributed environment, co-location isn't always possible. That's where collaboration platforms like Miro, Teams, Jira, or Hive, shown here, come into play. They allow us to simulate the benefits of co-located communication by sharing visual boards, hosting virtual stand-ups, and ensuring real-time updates. The goal is to keep remote stakeholders just as engaged as those sitting in the same office. This example shown here is actually from a project my team and I are working on now. All of our team members are listed here, and we all have our own assignments. We have follow-up. We can see whether they're in progress or not yet started, and we can open each activity and go in and add additional notes, add additional people to it if we need assistance. But we can just jump into Hive and we see really quickly, this is the new book that we're publishing. These are all the activities that we need to create to go along with the new version of the book. So it's a really convenient way to keep our team, who is not 100% co-located, involved in the same project and know exactly what's going on. Think about your own stakeholders. How many of them have very different preferences for communication? What adjustments have you had to make to meet those preferences? Once we've identified stakeholders and planned how to engage them, the next step is execution. This is where stakeholder engagement really comes to life. The first step is to execute the engagement plan. This means carrying out the strategies and tactics that we defined earlier, holding meetings, sharing updates, providing demos, and facilitating conversations. Importantly, engagement is not just about pushing information out. It's about two-way communication and building real relationships. Second, we need to manage expectations and influence. Stakeholders will come with their own assumptions about what the project should deliver, how quickly, and at what cost. Our role as PM is to clarify, align, and continuously reinforce what is realistic. At the same time, we leverage influence using trust, credibility, and negotiation skills to guide stakeholders towards decisions that support our project objectives. Finally, a critical skill here is learning how to handle resistant stakeholders with diplomacy. Not every stakeholder will be supportive, and some may actively push against you and your project. Instead of confronting resistance head-on, effective project leaders use emotional intelligence, listening, acknowledging concerns, and seeking common ground. For example, rather than dismissing a resistant stakeholder's objectives, you might invite them to a risk workshop, showing them how their perspective can help strengthen the project. The big takeaway here is that managing stakeholder engagement is about relationships. Technical plans and processes set the stage, but trust, credibility, and diplomacy determine whether stakeholders remain aligned and supportive over the long run. Something for you to think about here is think about a time that you faced a resistant stakeholder. What strategy worked or didn't work to bring them back on board? Hopefully you were able to manage that with diplomacy. Handling tough conversations is something that we might run into with our stakeholders during our projects. Even with the best planning, there will be times when stakeholder conversations become tough. Conflicting priorities, unmet expectations, or resistance to change are part of any project. The key is handling those conversations in a way that protects relationships and moves the project forward. First, we rely on emotional intelligence, negotiation, and our facilitation skills. Emotional intelligence means being aware of not just what is being said, but how it's being said, picking up on tone, body language, and underlying concerns. Negotiation helps us find middle ground when interests don't align, and facilitation skills create a safe space for dialogue, ensuring every voice is heard. Second, it is essential to address conflicts constructively. Avoidance often makes the problems worse. Instead, bring issues into the open and reframe them as opportunities for problem solving. For example, if two departments disagree about resource allocation, instead of treating it as a win-lose scenario, the project manager can facilitate a discussion about priorities, risks, and trade-offs. Finally, when conversations get tense, we should reframe the discussion around value delivery, reminding stakeholders of the project's ultimate purpose, delivering value to the customer or organization, helps you shift the focus away from personal positions and back towards that shared outcome. For instance, instead of debating which team's request gets priority, the team might ask which option delivers the greatest value to the customer right now. The big takeaway here is this: tough conversations don't have to damage relationships. With the right skills and mindset, they can actually strengthen trust, resolve misunderstandings, and realign everyone on delivering value. Think about a time when a tough conversation on your project actually made things better. What techniques did you use that helped you turn the conflict into a collaboration instead? Monitoring engagement. Stakeholder engagement, as we've been saying, isn't something we set once and simply forget. It has to be monitored continuously because interest, influence, and availability can all shift as projects evolve. The first step is to measure actual versus desired levels of engagement. When we planned stakeholder engagement, we defined where we wanted each stakeholder to be, whether that was supporting, leading, or simply aware. Monitoring asks, are they actually at that level today? If not, what's changed and what can I do? Second, we need to use metrics to track engagement in practical ways. This can include attendance at key meetings or reviews, responsiveness to requests for feedback, and even short surveys to gauge satisfaction and involvement. For example, if a stakeholder consistently skips sprint reviews or doesn't respond to feedback requests, that's a signal that engagement is slipping. Finally, monitoring engagement means taking action, updating the stakeholder register and adjusting tactics. If someone becomes more influential or resistant, their entry in the register should reflect that, and the engagement strategy should be recalibrated. This might mean increasing touch points, shifting the format of communication, or even involving senior leadership to help re-engage a critical stakeholder. The key takeaway is that monitoring is about closing the gap between where stakeholders are and where they need to be. It keeps engagement aligned with project needs and ensures we can address issues before they grow into real risks. I talked a little about always having my stakeholder register on hand so that I can add the extra columns. And if it's always on hand, we can easily continually update it as we move through. Think about one of your projects where stakeholder engagement may have declined over time. What early warning signs were there, and how could monitoring have helped you catch them sooner? In Agile projects, stakeholder engagement is not something that happens at set milestones. It's actually built into the rhythm of the work. First, Agile emphasizes frequent demos, sprint reviews, and retrospectives. Instead of waiting until the end of a project to showcase results, teams deliver small increments of value early and often. Stakeholders can see progress, give feedback, and influence direction in real time. Retrospectives add another layer of engagement by allowing the team and stakeholders to reflect on how collaboration is working and be able to adjust that immediately. Second, the product owner plays a central role as a stakeholder voice within the team. They continuously refine and prioritize the backlog, ensuring that the work being delivered aligns with stakeholder needs and business value. This role ensures that stakeholders don't have to be in every meeting, but their perspectives are always represented in decision-making. Finally, Agile relies heavily on information radiators, just like what we talked about before, the visual tools that make progress transparent. Examples include the Kanban boards, which show work in progress, and burn down charts, which show how much effort remains. These tools allow our stakeholders to get a quick, accurate snapshot of where things stand without needing constant updates. The key takeaway here is that Agile stakeholder engagement is ongoing, visible, and participatory. Instead of stakeholders being reviewers at the end, they become collaborators throughout the entire project lifecycle. I'd like you to think about a time when frequent demos or visible boards shift a stakeholder's perspective. How did it change the project outcome compared to the traditional approach? You might not all work in agile environments, but these tools can help in predictive traditional environments as well. The more opportunities you have to share information, the happier your stakeholders are going to be. As we wrap up, let's pull the main ideas together. First, remember that stakeholders determine success. No matter how technically sound a project is, if the people impacted by it don't see value, don't feel engaged, or resist the outcome, the project will struggle. Stakeholder satisfaction is the ultimate measure of project success. Second, early and consistent engagement builds trust. If we wait until the end to involve stakeholders, it's usually too late. By bringing them in early, listening consistently, and being transparent, we reduce surprises, avoid costly rework, and create alignment from the very start. Trust is built one interaction at a time, and consistency is what sustains it. Finally, success comes from combining the tools and skills that we've discussed. We have maps to help us analyze power, interest, and focus, communication cadences to create predictable, transparent communication rhythms, conversation skills, using our own emotional intelligence, negotiation, and facilitation skills to navigate through these situations. Put those three together, maps, cadences, and conversation, and you have a powerful framework for driving engagement, building trust, and leading your projects to success. Looking back at your own projects, which of these three, maps, cadences, or conversation skills, do you think you most need to strengthen to boost your stakeholder engagement abilities? Give that some thought and how you might be able to use that in your current or upcoming projects. RMC Learning Solutions offers you multiple ways to prepare if you have not yet received your CAPM or your PMP or your Agile PMI certificates yet. Coming up, we offer instructor-led virtual training, e-learning, and we also offer on-site training. So if your organization has a large group of people they'd like to put through a class, we can actually come to your organization and deliver that for you in person. We have a couple of three-day class coming up on PM fundamentals. It'll be September 9th through 11th. And then we also have a PMP exam prep class coming up September 15th through 19th. You'll find that we do have a lot of resources on our website, and I encourage you to check out our website. And for those of you attending the webinar this weekend, today, actually attending it, we're offering a 20% off coupon for all of our web attendees. If you go to our website and you want to purchase a product, you can enter webinar 20, all caps, into the promo code field that you see. So that's webinar 20, and that's good until midnight on Sunday night. Continuing our monthly webinar series, our September webinar will be focusing on project recovery, fixing troubled projects, rescue projects before they derail. We'll talk about recognizing early warning signs of trouble, building and executing a recovery plan, rebaselining scope and schedule, and how to communicate resets to the team and the stakeholders to rebuild trust. So that'll be on September 26th of next month. For today, to claim your PDU, you can log in to PMI's website, navigate to the CCRS where you would normally claim your PDUs, and then all of the information about the webinar is shown here. My apologies. The name of today's webinar was Stakeholder Engagement, and today's date is August 22nd. I'm going to go ahead and lead this up and take time for some of your questions. So if anyone has questions, I'd like you to go ahead and type them into the chat, and then I will work on answering them in order, and you guys can continue with the information for your PDUs here. Okay, so again, the program title is The Power of Stakeholder Engagement, and today is August 22nd. And if anyone has questions, I welcome you to put them in the chat box. Well, I'm not seeing any questions. Did we do that good of a job on the webinar?
Cheryl, this is Kristen. The questions are all falling underneath the question. They can't reach the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so one of the questions here, when your stakeholder is another company, for example, a customer that is impacted by your project, how would you map it? I would go back and use our interest and influence chart for the customer, because the customer is most likely going to have a very high amount of power, and you most likely have a point person at that company as well. So that point person I would involve in the daily communications or the ongoing full-blown updates. I've had this situation many times in my past where it was a company was my customer, but having that one stakeholder or the equivalent of the sponsor on their side actively involved allowed us to show demos. That person could then get other people from the customer team to invite for the demo. So it actually helped quite a bit if you can establish a point person to kind of lead that stakeholder group. But definitely use the interest and influence chart to get that started so that you can identify exactly where they would fall. Is there a course ID? Kristen, do we have course IDs?
No, ma'am, they just have a name and they go in generically. That's kind of what all the information, the program title is literally the name of the webinar. The date completed is today. That's pretty much it.
Okay, so the once again, the title, my apologies, it's not on the slide. The Power of Stakeholder Engagement is the correct title for today's webinar. When stakeholder is not responding at all, then escalation is the option. I think that's going to be of what your idea of escalation is. For me, if I have a stakeholder that's not responding at all, if I have the ability to give them a phone call, set up a Zoom or a session with them, even send them a text, depending on the influence of that stakeholder, you know, I'd even march up to their office if they're in my same environment. But yes, escalation of some sort, if you need that stakeholder responding to you, and it's important that you do keep your stakeholders engaged, escalating it in some way might be your option. If you can't get them to respond at all, then yes, maybe you do need to escalate and go to their boss. But personally, I try to do everything that I can, whether it's dropping them a text message, send them an email, call them on the phone. I try to start with anything I can do personally. And then once I've exhausted the things I can do personally, that's when I might have to go to their boss and be like, hey, you put this person on as a primary stakeholder for this project and they're not engaging. I need your help in getting them to engage. Okay. I don't see any more questions here. With that, I'm going to thank you all very much for joining us today and remind you that you can visit rmcls.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn for more leadership tips and to register for upcoming webinars. And once again, if any of you are interested in any of the products that we offer, you can use that webinar 20, all caps, as your discount code through midnight Sunday night if you'd like to take advantage of anything on our website. Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and I hope y'all have a fantastic weekend. Thank you so much.